Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and today our guest is Julissa Arce, author, speaker, and social justice activist who focuses her work around immigrant justice and education equality. We talk today about Julissa's newest book, You Sound Like a White Girl, The Case for Rejecting Assimilation, and the ways that Julissa is thinking about colorism, history, and the ideas of a united Latinidad. The Stacks Book Club pick for March is A Mercy by Toni Morrison, and we will be discussing the book on the podcast on March 30th with our guest, Imani Perry. If you like The Stacks and want more of it, please head to patreon.com/The Stacks to join The Stacks Pack. You get perks like our bonus episodes, virtual book club, discounts on merch, and shout outs on this show. Speaking of shout outs, here are our newest members of The Stacks Pack: Becky Zoderman, Nicole, Catherine, Nikki Young, Katie Samlow, Taylor Harris, Lindsay Turner, Julia Erdlin, Kelsey, and Liza. Thank you all so much for joining the Stacks Pack and putting your money behind the work of this show. I know I say this every week, but please know there would be no podcast without the Stacks Pack. So if you like the Stacks, if you like what you're hearing every week, consider joining the Stacks Pack on Patreon at patreon.com/The Stacks. Okay, now it's time for my conversation with Julissa Arce. All right, everybody, I'm very excited. I'm joined today by Julissa Arce, who's the author of You Sound Like a White Girl, The Case for Rejecting Assimilation. Julissa, welcome to The Stacks.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a fan of the show, so it's great to now be on this side.
Oh my gosh, I'm honored. Anytime someone says that, I still get like butterflies. I forget that people listen. So we always sort of start here. In about 30 seconds or so, can you tell us about the book?
Sure. So the book is a polemic sort of cultural criticism on the ways in which America asks immigrants and people of color to assimilate. And the second part of the book is about how do we reclaim our culture, our history, our identity that doesn't center on whiteness.
Yeah. I'm so curious. I feel like this is maybe an obvious question, but I feel like maybe there's more there. I'm curious when and how you got the idea to actually write this book.
So it wasn't like a light bulb went off in my head and it was like, oh, this is the book you have to write. I think it really was the course of the last like 4 or 5 years being on the road, talking about my other 2 books, My Underground American Dream and Someone Like Me, where some of the questions that people would ask me, I would think, well, this is not the right way to ask this question. So like, for example, people would ask me, well, how come you stayed undocumented for such a long time? Right? Because I was undocumented for 10 years. And in that question, I would just think, I didn't choose to stay undocumented.
Right.
And I think there's this false idea that there's a right way to come to America. So that was like one of the questions I wanted to answer in the book, right? And there were all of these types of questions that people would ask me that I would think there's an answer for this. And maybe I should write about these answers.
Yeah.
So partly it was that. Partly it was I have had a real craving to understand the history of my people in this country because I never learned that in school. And so I started just reading a lot of history books, a lot of sort of more academic books. And I was just fascinated with the history that I was learning for the first time in my life. And I was really curious to synthesize that history in the context of the things that are happening in our country today. And so it's sort of like all of these things were happening. I was reading this history and I was like, there's something here that I really have to explore. And then it sort of just all came together when I sat down to write. I wanted to write about personal stories about the ways in which I dealt with assimilation and the ways in which, even though I did assimilate in many ways, that still didn't give me belonging. Right. And then I thought, okay, well, these personal stories are interesting and they're powerful in their own right, but how can I make these personal stories really tell bigger truths? And so that's when I started incorporating a lot of the history, a lot of the more sort of political and social commentary,
Right.
And what we got was, you sound like a white girl.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes this book really special and different is how you incorporated so much history. For people who don't know, aren't familiar with you and your work, you mentioned, your people. Can you just be a little more specific so people know exactly what history we're talking about?
Like, who's my people?
Yeah. Well, like I know, I read the book, but I feel like people at
Yeah.
home are like, well, who are the people?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of specifically Mexican American history, and they're more broadly Latino history. But I do focus a lot on Mexican American history. One, because Mexicans were part of what is now the United States before it
Right.
became the United States, and the wave of immigrants into the United States were first Mexican Americans, and then other Latin American people followed. And there's also mentions of Puerto Rican history, because Puerto
Mhm.
Ricans too have a very long history in the
Right.
United States, given the colonization of Puerto Rico by the United States. So that's my people. But as I mentioned, sort of in the introduction of the book, though this is a book that centers my experience and our history, I definitely think that people who are not part of our community will learn a lot from it, will find themselves in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and will learn some things that they
Yeah.
didn't know before.
I would say that I fall squarely in that category as, I'm not, Latina in any way that I know of, but I saw myself a lot in your story. And I think like just the title of the book, You Sound Like a White Girl, it could be the title of my memoir as well. And I
Mm.
learned so much. Like, I think this is going to sound really crazy and maybe like a little dumb. And I apologize to everyone listening, but like it had never dawned on me that there were Black Mexicans.
Oh, yeah.
Like it had never, of course, like, did I think that they just magically weren't brought to Mexico? Like, no. And I know, like, I know there are Black Hondurans. I know there are Black Brazilians.
Mhm.
I know there are Black Colombians. Like, for whatever reason, when I read that in your book, I had a moment of like, wow, I am an actual moron. And also, why is this history totally excluded from any conversation? So I definitely think people who do not have the same cultural background as you will learn things, will see themselves, or will see themselves either in relating to you or relating to maybe some of the questions that you were asked and things. So I think it's like a very inclusive book, but I appreciated that your audience also felt very clear. Like I know I
Mm.
didn't feel like you were writing a book to like teach people. Like it
Yeah.
felt very strong in a sense of like this is about us and this is, I'm encouraging my people to take back some of our culture and our history and all of that. And I really really liked that point of view. But kind of speaking about this idea of like having people who are included who maybe aren't Latina or whatever, you talk about race in America being a binary between black and
Mhm.
white. And I'm curious because you sort of say, like, is there a place for us or whatever? And like, and maybe this is because I am black. And so my lens is like sort of skewed, but I've always thought about America in that way. But also, I've thought of binaries as like, on a spectrum.
Mm.
And so I'm
Mm.
wondering, like, how do you prefer to think about it that feels more inclusive to you? Or is a spectrum, not I don't know. I'm just sort of curious about your
Yeah.
thinking around that. That was a
Yeah.
lot.
So
Sorry.
no, yeah. You definitely mentioned a lot. I want to come back to some of the points that you made. But on your question, and this is one of the hardest parts of the book that I wrestled with, and I spent many months
Mm,
making sure that I wrote it in a way that was coherent, that like the
mhm.
thoughts swirling in my mind were came on the page. So I say that because, whatever I can say in this interview that we have together, this time that we have together, is not going to be nearly as
Right.
uh, eloquent as what I wrote. So I encourage people to read the book so they can get this part the way that I wrote it. But to answer your question, this question came up for me since I was like in seventh grade, right? And I was learning about all this history.
Mhm,
And it goes back to history because I was learning this history of the United States that was always told from a white point of view,
mhm.
and that included some Black stories. Of course, those Black stories were never told from the perspective of Black people,
Right.
but at least I sort of saw them, right?
Right. Right.
Even if they weren't completely accurate. But then I was like, where were we? You know, I
Right.
was just really curious to find out, like, where were Mexicans during the Civil War, and where were Mexicans during the Civil Rights Movement, and where were
Mm-hmm.
Mexicans when the United States fought for its independence from England and were, you know, committing genocide against indigenous people. Like, I was just like,
Right.
where were we? And so that's really where this question of, like, where do we fit in?
Mm,
Because it does feel, as someone who is not white and as someone who is not Black, that sometimes conversations about race do live in this binary,
right.
and that there is no room for sort of more perspectives,
Right.
even though all of our experiences as people of color play into that binary.
Why do you think that is? Do you have a theory as like why we exclude other voices?
Well, so I really think that this binary is a framework of white supremacy, because what
Mhm.
happens is, you know, if you can only be there's this really funny meme that it's like this little Latino kid walking down the road, and then there's a fork on the road. One side of the road leads to becoming a white supremacist,
Okay.
and the other road leads to acting Black.
Got it.
Right? and and I saw this meme and I was like, oh my God, this is in a very funny meme, like the way I've sometimes have felt about things, you know,
Hmm.
in that I think that this binary drives people to try to be as close in proximity to whiteness, because somehow we might feel that that will offer us protection, that
Mm,
that will give us humanity, right? And I think that what that does is that it upholds white supremacy, while at the same time we then play into the oppression of Black people,
right.
right? And so that's why I think it's so important to sort of not look beyond. And I'm very clear about this in the book. Like, this is not about looking beyond the Black white narrative in America, because that's a very real narrative
Sure.
that needs to continue to be you know, studied and explored and discussed. So it's not about looking beyond, but it's about looking through, right, and trying to make
Mm,
spaces. One of the things that I mentioned is that, you know, I don't want to be described as what I'm not,
hmm.
right? I want to be described by what I am. And
I
so
agree with that. I feel like so often people are like, "Oh, not white or not Black," and I'm like,
yeah,
it's tricky."
and it's funny because even what you said about, not funny, but interesting, even what you mentioned about, like, it hadn't dawned on you that there were, like, you know, Black Mexicans. And I mentioned in the book that, you know, of all the enslaved Africans that were brought forcefully,
Mhm.
a very large percentage of that, something like 90%, were taken to the Caribbean and to Latin America.
Yeah.
So there are more Black people that
Yeah.
live in Latin America than do in the United
Right.
States.
And I knew that about like Colombia. Like I think of Colombia as being almost a Black country, and same with
Mm,
Brazil. But for
mhm.
some reason,
Oh, in Mexico,
it
like
was
Mexico was,
Mexico.
yeah. Well, that's also Mexico's fault, because
Sure.
we have hidden that history.
Right.
It was just in the last few years that um, that on the census, in the Mexican census,
Right.
that Black Mexicans could assert their Black identity on the census. You know, I
Right.
mentioned in the book that the second president of Mexico was Black and Indigenous.
Hmm.
But if you see portraits of him, you would never guess, you would
Right.
never know that he was Black,
Right.
because the portraits that were painted of him were literally whitewashed,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
it's also our fault that people don't know that, and we need to rectify that.
Yeah. I think so. This kind of, I was going to get to this later, but I feel like we're firmly in the place to talk a little bit about colorism
Mm,
in the Latina community, and sort of about, because I think one of the things that I think I have known, and I think, you know, maybe it's different in different communities, but like as a Black person, and I'm mixed, I have a white mother and a Black father. So I have thought about color a lot. You know, it's like one of
mhm.
those things that's part of my experience. But I have friends who are, you know, from different places in Latin and Central America who have struggled a lot with that conversation about race versus like nationality And I know it's really complicated because race is a social construct, and so it gets weird and it gets confusing. But like oftentimes I remind people like you can be white and be Cuban. You can be white and be Brazilian. Like and I always use the example of like, look, no one's calling Ted Cruz a person of color. You know, like
Right.
he's Cuban or Marco Rubio or whatever. We all can see that and be like, that's a white man whose family is from Cuba. And so I'm wondering sort of like in the book, you talk about like people who are white still claiming that person of color identity. And you use the example of Selena, who is, you know, fair skinned, but, you know, I would argue is not white in the same ways that Marco Rubio is, but maybe that's also because I know his politics in a way that makes me disgusted.
Yeah.
But so I'm wondering sort of like how you're, you know, and I know you're still reckoning with this, which is very much in the book, how you reckon with the idea of like white Latin American people, Caribbean people, et cetera, claiming or not claiming the term people of color.
Yeah. I don't go into this much in the book about, you know, people claiming. Well, I mean, I do in some ways. So Selena, we're talking here about Selena Quintanilla, you know, Bitty Bitty Bom Bom Selena.
Of course,
not,
yes.
not Rare Beauty, not Rare Beauty.
Oh, not Gomez.
Selena Gomez, right.
Yeah. Sorry.
And I actually say, you know, there are people who are making the argument that Selena Quintanilla is quote unquote white passing. And that just like...
I don't agree with that.
Makes me fall off my chair because I'm like, in no planet in the universe is Selena Quintanilla white. Like she was never confused with a white woman, you know, ever. I do think that there are many Latinos who are white, you know, who have blonde hair and very light skin and colored eyes, who when they immigrate to the United States, those that do, feel like when they cross the border, that gives them a different identity. And in some ways, I understand, you know, if you speak with an accent, you might be discriminated. You know, if somebody looks at your last name and they've never met you, they might pass you up for an interview when they don't know what you look like, right?
Sure.
And I don't think that people who are white Latinos are any less Latino. Right? They're still Latinos. They still hold the culture. They still hold the values, the traditions. But my point is that they are not denied their humanity based on the color of their skin.
Right.
And so I think that these two things are happening. One is, and I challenge and encourage white Latinos to fully grasp their whiteness and in the ways in which they benefit from white privilege. Because I have found many Latinos to stop short of fully confronting that in themselves. And at the same time, I think that the conversation sometimes goes to places like trying to call Selena Quintanilla a white woman, which is like to me, it's incomprehensible.
I'm with you.
That somebody would say that.
I'd never even heard that until I saw it in your book, to be honest.
Yeah. You know, so I think part is like, and I've met so many like brown Latinos who maybe are a little bit lighter skin, but they're not white.
Right.
You know, but I feel like people have guilted them into being like, you can't call yourself a person of color because you're like, you know, slightly lighter skin. Like, I mean, you know, me, for example, right? I am an indigenous person. I have never been confused for someone white.
Right.
But kind of going back to that black and white binary, it's like there's people who want to force me to be like, you're white. And I'm like, no, I am not white.
Right.
And I think that there is something beautiful about asserting, because I think for a long time, many people in the Latino community wanted to be white.
Sure.
And wanted to be seen as white. And now there are many of us who are saying and asserting our own identity as Latinos. So it's very complicated.
Yeah.
And there isn't one right answer to any of this. But I think that the more conversations that we have about it, the more we might figure it out. And identity is something very personal, like how people choose to identify themselves. I mean, I even talk about the words that we use to describe the Latino
That was my
community
next
can cause so
question.
much controversy,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think I mean, again, like race in America and everywhere is a construct. And I think, especially in America, like we think so much of, like you said, the white, black binary, but also, in America, to be black is to have, one drop of blackness in you.
Yeah.
And so and so it's interesting when when I'm reading about or talking to people who aren't black and they are from other groups, whether it's Asian groups, Latina groups, whatever, and they have the ability to sort of decide some of this stuff in a way that,
I
like,
think
for
some
black
people
people,
do.
it's different. It's so different. Like,
Yeah.
because, of course there's like colorism and it's like, oh, she's really light, she's not really black or whatever. But like it historically in this country, to be a black person is to, have I think it's 132nd, I think. If you have one, so I think that's like great grandparent or maybe 4 greats. I'm terrible at this, but it's far back. And like you see pictures of people who are, 132nd black, and it's like, that's a white person today. That's a straight up white person, but like they were enslaved. And so it's just an interesting thing as we talk about like you're saying, identifying yourself and getting to choose your identity and how that works and what choices you make, for whatever reasons.
Yeah. And I do talk about, I do talk about that in the book, that we in the Latino community who are not Black Latinos, who are not, indigenous in the sense of like growing up in an indigenous community.
Right. Okay.
That we also have to confront the privileges that we have.
Sure.
And I certainly am very aware that my experience is completely different, than other people. So, and I try to be careful not to, like, I can only speak from my own experience,
right?
Like I can't like try to write about anybody else's experience, even like other Latinos. And I say that, this is my experience, my perspective, like not that of an entire community.
Yeah, I think you do a really good job of sort of centering your experience in the ways that you talk about, what you've gone through and what you've found to believe, as well as like mixing in the history like we talked about. I think it's very clearly like your voice, your opinions, but also, you've contextualized it, which I really appreciate as a reader. You sort of touched on this, and I really want to ask a little bit. I know that the language about what you call yourselves, whether it's Latine, Latinx, Latino, Hispanic. Will you talk a little bit about sort of, I didn't even realize there was a huge conversation about it until I started listening to Code Switch, and they do like a whole thing on like Latinidad. But I'm wondering if you would kind of share with the audience what the issue is, what the question is, and why it is so difficult to come up with a name.
Well, I think part of the reason it's so difficult to come up with a name is because we do all have, first of all, we come from like very different, distinct national identities, right? Like there's Mexican, Puerto Rican, and Colombian, and Dominican, and Salvadoran, and Honduran. And when we live in those places, when I lived in Mexico, I was Mexican. I didn't think of myself as like Latina or Hispanic, and I think all of these words are our efforts to assert our own identity that is distinct and separate from other identities. And we just, depending on the word, for example, there's a big controversy around the word Latinx, right? Because people think that the X is sort of somehow disrespectful to like Spanish, and that we're trying to like anglicize our
Spanish
language, the Spanish language, right? But then there are like non-binary people who Latinx is the word that they like and that they use. There's Latin. And so I think each of the words tells us a truth about who we are and how we came to be. Each word also falls short of fully encapsulating everybody's identity and experience. And I think the most important thing is to choose whatever word fits you and to respect the words that other people choose to describe themselves.
Yeah.
I describe myself as Latina, because I am a cisgendered woman. And so Latina fits me, right? But I have friends who like to be called Latinx. So I talk to them in the context of being Latinx, right? So there isn't one single word. I don't think I don't see us like coming together to be like, okay, this is the word for everybody, you know?
Right. But some people find Hispanic to be offensive.
Well, see, the thing about Hispanic, so Hispanic was supposed to be a word that for people who speak Spanish. So in that sense, Spanish people from Spain who are European, who are many cases white, they are Hispanic.
Right.
You know? But I think that word Hispanic to me feels this sort of like respectable word, like this word that people use because it's more respectable.
It's like African American.
Because it centers the whiteness in our community, right? It centers sort of this like mythical Spanish ancestor somewhere down the line.
Right.
And so I don't like using it anymore. For a long time, I did use Hispanic, especially when I lived in Texas. You know, when I lived in Texas, I was Hispanic. Okay. And until I started to realize, like, oh shit, using this word to me felt like I was doing with what many people in my family have done, which is to say, oh, you know, your grandpa was Spanish and he had blue eyes, and it's like, no, he didn't.
Right. That white supremacy popping back up.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think that there are some Spanish people from Spain that want to be Latino or be Latina, and you know, I have many Spanish friends who I love dearly, but I do not think that they are Latinos, because Latinos are people who have roots in Latin America.
Right.
And if you're from Spain, the only route you have to Latin America is that your ancestors colonized us and committed genocide and ruined us.
Right. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You are a conquistador, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. So like if you want to be Latino and those are the roots you want to claim, you know, but you see it even like what happened with Javier Bardem.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, where he's like, I don't know. That would take us down in a different direction. So maybe I won't talk about Javier
It
Bardem.
made me think about Alec Baldwin's wife. Hilar, and now she's Ilaria. She used to be my yoga teacher, and she was Hillary. I just want to go on the record. People know this story.
God,
I know her from a long time ago in New York. But her whole thing of like, oh, I'm a Spaniard, but like part of it was that there was some sort of like fetishization of like being a person of color almost.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting.
But it's like, even if you were trying to be Spanish, like
you're still white.
You still would not be a person of color.
You're still white. You're Spanish. Like you're European then. But what's so interesting is like, I don't know if you're familiar with Imani Perry, but she wrote this book, South to America, and she talks about all these different places, and she talks about Florida. And one of the things that she says, which again had never dawned on me, is she's like, we have racialized the Spanish language, which means that people from Spain, white European people who are from Spain, somehow get to be racialized as well and have like the exoticism of being being something that they're not. She's like, they're just white people. They're just like the French. Yeah. They're just from Spain. Like, and it's just such an interesting thing that we in America have turned some of the most famous colonizers into like this ethnic group. It's like, no, they're white. They did the same shit England did.
Yeah. In New York, when I lived in New York, it was new to me coming from Texas that people would use Spanish to describe Latinos. You know, we're like, oh, that person's Spanish. And it's like, no, they speak Spanish,
right? But
they're not Spanish,
right?
You know, Spanish people are people from
Spain.
Those are Spanish people. But it was interesting to see how often that word is used in New York.
Yeah.
In Texas, I didn't really see it used. You know, in Texas, our version of that was Hispanic.
Right. Okay, I want to talk about one kind of more big topic from the book, then we'll take a break. So part of your story is that you immigrated to America. You talk about how your visa went up. You were here undocumented for about 10 years. And I think like I'm always fascinated by the ways in which people who are born in America do not understand immigration and
Mm.
what it means to be undocumented and why someone would be like you talked about earlier. And I'd love, people need to read the book because you go into such detail and we will not be able to even like scrape the surface. But I want to talk about what you call the lie of citizenship when you're brown in America. Will
Mhm.
you sort of explain that to people who maybe are listening who are American born or who immigrated through white ancestors or whatever? Because I think it's really fucking different.
Yeah. Well, so one big headline here is that immigration, naturalization, citizenship laws have been driven by race
Mhm.
more than any other factor
Always.
from the very beginning. In 1790, when Congress came up with the first laws of the United States, it said that only free white men could naturalize, could become citizens. So from day one, it was race that was driving who was worthy of American citizenship, right?
Mm.
That was followed by the Chinese Exclusion Act. That was followed by, later not just excluding Chinese people, but like all Asians in general, followed by deportations of Mexican Americans, many of whom were US citizens during times of economic downturn. So it's always been driven by race. And it continues to this day to be driven by race.
Mhm.
So having said all that, I didn't stay undocumented because I wanted to.
Right.
Because being undocumented is really, really hard.
Mhm.
Everything you do is dictated by your immigration status. Everything you can and cannot do, the things you do anyway, and then are accused of breaking the law.
Mhm.
Right? There is no path for citizenship for people. I mean, I became a US citizen because my husband's a US citizen, and so I was able to naturalize through him, and also because I came here with a visa. Had
Mm.
I crossed the border, even if I was married to a US citizen, I might not be able to fix my immigration status.
Right.
So this line that people often refer to, like get in the back of the line, do it the right way.
Right.
The line is a myth. It doesn't exist. We need new immigration laws to create that line so people can get in a line
Right.
and go through the process of naturalization. So yeah, I mean, there is no path to citizenship for many people, and depending on where you come from, you're treated very differently. I mean, I think what's happening in Ukraine,
Yeah.
with the invasion of Vladimir Putin and the creation of Ukrainian refugees, you can just see it
Right.
how differently Ukrainian refugees are being treated and how they're being welcomed and how they're being spoken about in the media.
Right.
And it's a perfect example of, depending on what you look like, you'll either be treated as a refugee or as an invader.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And the way that we're
Criminal.
treating Ukrainian refugees should be an example of how we treat all
Right.
refugees.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think some meme was like showing a picture of Ukrainian refugees and then what we saw with the Haitian refugees and the
Mhm.
people on horses. And
Yeah.
obviously, for years and years and years and years predating Donald Trump, I just want to say that because as much as I hate him, he's not the only one.
Right.
The ways that people from Latin America have been treated at the border for years and years. Okay, we'll take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Valentine's Day is upon us, and I've got love on the brain. Love for books, duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. Okay, we're back. I think we might touch more on the book, but I do want to make sure we take some time to talk about your process, which I always love and find to be a really fun thing. So you're so busy. You are one of those people that has like a million hyphens in your name. Like it's like Julissa Arce, who activist, writer, author, speaker, boom, boom, boom. How did you find time to write this book?
Well, so I do a lot of things, but to me, all of these things are sort of related. They're just branches of the same tree, and it obviously helps a lot to get in advance to give you the space and time to write a book.
Right.
I don't know how else you could do it, how else somebody could do it, because I can't imagine sort of having a full-time job and then coming home at 6 or 7 p.m. at night to sit down and write.
Right.
And some people do that, and it's like it's so amazing that they can do that, and it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
So I took months off from pretty much like everything else I was doing to do the research, to sit down and write. Also, I started writing, like I actually sat down on my computer to write March 2020.
Oh, wow.
So writing
Well,
during lockdown,
right.
in some ways it was like, well, you can't do anything else. You're not going to be on the road doing speaking engagements right now because everything's canceled. Like,
Right.
so it sort of gave me the ability to really, really focus. But yeah, I think it's just, and then the way that the book process works, I worked on a proposal, so I had to take time off for that. But then there were months when it was, my agent was just sort of like pitching the book, right? And during that time, I was doing something else. And when I finally got my contract and I started writing, writing a first draft, and then I would send it off to my editor. And then during that time that I was waiting to get feedback and things, I would work on other projects.
Right.
And then I get it back. I have to work on edit, so I take a pause from the other projects. So I almost find it like it's like cooking a meal.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's what it sounds like.
And like when you put something in the oven, then you can start working on things like on your salad or chopping things or whatever.
Yeah.
For whatever thing you're doing, and once everything's done, maybe I'll start working on dessert. So it's sort of like it's sort of just like cooking a meal and just finding the right time to, when things are in the oven, time to do other things.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Okay, how do you like to write? How many hours a day? How often? Music or no? Are you having snacks and beverages? Where are you? Do you have rituals? Kind of paint the picture.
I have about 10 different drinks a day.
Yes. Oh my God, talk about them. I'm so happy. Love that you're here.
Coffee, tea, LaCroix.
What's your flavor of
water?
LaCroix?
Oh my gosh, I love the watermelon LaCroix.
Oh, okay.
And then there's also one that's called Waterloo.
I don't know that one.
That's like a Texas brand, I think, but they sell it at Costco.
Oh, okay.
And that has really good like orange flavor and like blackberry flavor or whatever. Like, so I just like having like a plethora of drinks to choose from. I, in the last year, have really more written like in my home office because now I actually have a home office.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. So I write here. My first 2 books I wrote a lot of it at coffee shops,
Okay.
and I really love coffee shop writing. I wrote a lot of it on the plane.
Okay.
Like I love writing on a plane because I just put
Mm.
my headphones on, listen to some music, and like really focus on just writing. Because there's like, what else are you gonna do?
Right.
There's like nowhere to
Exactly.
get distracted. I'm not gonna get up and decide that I need to do the dishes right this second,
Right.
or
Right. Right. Right.
that I need to clean my entire house before I write the next sentence, which happens when I'm home. I really enjoy writing with music in the background, even though it just kind of becomes it, like sometimes my Spotify or my Apple Music or whatever will just like cut off and I don't
Mm.
even notice because
Right.
now I'm focused. Um,
What kind of music?
all kinds of music. I mean,
Okay.
I listen to music in Spanish. I actually listen to a lot of scores,
Okay.
like movie scores.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I've
so
heard
like
this a lot. Yeah.
it's because it's awesome.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
You're like a prolific writer. It's like the battle scene, and you're like, da 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 da. Yeah,
Yeah.
getting it in. Look at that sentence, killing it.
Yeah, the Game of Thrones score,
Epic.
so good. Also, the Succession score,
Oh yeah.
so good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then in terms of like number of hours and things, I don't. There are times when I write for 8 hours, and then there are
Mhm.
times when I write for half an hour, and that's all I got for the day.
Yeah. Are you a write every day person or no?
When I'm writing a book, yes.
Okay.
Right now, no.
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 You're like waiting for my book to come out. Gonna take.
Yeah,
A break.
right now I'm writing emails to everybody being like, support my book, buy
Yeah.
my book,
Yes.
send out a
Totally.
tweet about my book.
Yes. Yes. So in your book, you talk about your past life working in something financial. I don't understand that stuff. How did you know you wanted to be a writer or to make the switch to leaving that and doing something more on the creative side?
Mhm. When I was a little girl, I used to write stories and I used to write poetry and I used to perform. I would write little plays and then make all my cousins perform my plays at like family functions. So since I was little, I've always really liked writing. I've always really liked telling stories. And then as I was growing up, writing in my journal was like I used to write in my journal every day, and that's where I could be the most honest
Mm.
because I could take away all the layers of pretending,
Mm-hmm.
because it was just for me. Nobody was ever going to read that, and I could be honest about everything, and most importantly, I could be honest about myself.
Mm.
In these journals.
Mhm.
So writing was always an outlet for me, and reading was always an outlet for me. One of the biggest things that drove me to Wall Street was the money.
Sure.
Right? Like, where can I make the most money? Because I wanted to like be able to take care of my family and my parents who were back in Mexico. There was all these like personal reasons why I just needed to have a lot of money. And I was good at finance. Like I was always good at math. And so I was good at it. I enjoyed the time I was there, but there was always something that would, just something that would feel I'm supposed to be doing something else. Like I'm
Mm.
supposed to be doing something else. Like this isn't it for me.
Mhm.
And then I had a really incredible opportunity to write my first book because of this Bloomberg Business Week article that was written about my life that got a lot of traction. And then the woman, Lisa Leshny, who's my agent now, she had reached out and said, like, do you want to write a book? And I'm like,
Mm.
yes, I do. And I went back and I looked at some journals. And in my journal, I had said, one day I'm going to write a book.
Mm.
And all this shit that I went through is going to be for something. And I had outlined the chapters that I was
Mm.
going to write.
Wow.
And those chapters, I was like, man, these chapters were really good descriptions. I'm going to use that. Yeah, and then once I started writing that book, it just became clear to me that this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to write. I'm supposed to tell stories.
Right.
Right this second, I can't imagine how I'm ever going to write another book.
You will.
Because
You will.
I am exhausted, and this book took a lot out of me. But I know one day soon
You'll be
I'll
ready again.
be ready again.
Yeah, you got to take the time to decompress a little bit, and then you'll know. This is one of my favorite questions, and you sort of talk about this in the book, which I appreciated. But what's a word you can never spell correctly on the first try?
God, itinerary.
Oh, That's a really hard one.
Itinerary.
Yeah. Yeah, because is it an E or an I?
Right.
I think it's an I. I'm a terrible
Like
speller, so I never know.
itinerary cannot spell. Hors
Oh, yeah. The
I
French
don't know how to
words,
spell
it's
hors
like,
d'oeuvres.
get a grip. Like, I don't speak French. I cannot spell in French. I can barely spell in English. Yeah, hors d'oeuvres is hard.
Yeah, those two words come
Those
to
are good
mind.
ones. You actually make such a great point in the book about Spanish, because like you talk about in the second half of the book about a lot about reclaiming, and that's sort of like the thesis of the second half. And you talk about, you know, people who say to you either, why don't you speak Spanish, or not to you, but to people who are,
Yeah.
you know, descendants of people who speak Spanish, immigrants. And then you also talk about how people are like, oh, I'm learning Spanish because it's such a good thing to have on my resume or whatever. And then you have this point where you're like, no one asks children or descendants of Polish immigrants why they don't speak Polish, or like what. And I thought that was just such an interesting point, which goes back to, I think, the racialization of Spanish.
Yeah.
And the white supremacy, of course. I mean, doesn't it always go back to white supremacy? I feel like.
Yes. It's white supremacy and the patriarchy.
Yeah. It's literally like every answer on every quiz. It's like, why do we do this in America? Well, is it have to do with the patriarchy or white supremacy, or bonus points for both?
Yeah, exactly.
But I did love that. I did love thinking about, yeah, I have never heard anyone say to a like child of Italian immigrants, why don't you speak Italian or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah. What parts of the book came easily for you, and what parts were more difficult to write?
I feel like this whole entire book was difficult to write. The whole book was difficult to write because it was a departure from what I have written in the past, which is memoir.
Right.
Right. And the voice that I used to write my memoirs was very different than the voice that I used to write You Sound Like a White Girl.
Mm-hmm.
But there were sections that flowed more easily, even if they were difficult to write. I think that the sections that I really struggled with, I mentioned earlier, were the sections where I was talking about reclaiming our identity, like what is my race. Those parts were difficult to write because I was still trying to make sense of them, even as I was writing.
Right.
Like some of the other parts of the book, I sort of already had conclusions in my mind that I wanted to take readers on this journey to this conclusion that I already knew what it was. I already knew where we're going. Where with those sections, even as I was writing, new things were coming up for me. Even as I was doing research, new things would come up for me. And so I had to write and rewrite and then write again. And then finally my editor was like, okay, we have to like turn this in.
You're done. You need to take a break, kid. Yeah. That's so funny.
So yeah, those were hard because I didn't have a conclusion in my mind already.
Right.
And I was trying to find it as I was writing.
Yeah. For people who love You Sound Like a White Girl, what are some books you might recommend to them that are maybe in conversation with what you did?
Yeah. So here are some of the books that I read for research on the book. There was Manifest Destinies by Laura Gomez. There was Finding Latinx by Paola Ramos. Then there was, books like How the Irish Became White. There was a book called Working Towards Whiteness. There was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. There is a novel that just came out called A Ballad of Love and Glory. And it's a historical fiction novel set during the Mexican-American War. And I think it really explores this part of American history that we gloss over, though it is an incredibly important piece of history because it was the first time that the United States ever invaded another country and like occupied the capital of Mexico. And it's incredible. And it's kind of really cool to learn some of that history through this like historical novel that's like a war story, but it's also like a love story and there's like really sexy scenes in it. It's an amazing novel. let's see. I read so many more books, but I think those are a good place to start.
I feel like one of the books that you reference is the Paul Ortiz.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me of that.
That
yes.
one comes up a bunch.
Yes. A Latinx and African-American History of the United States by Paul Ortiz.
Yeah.
Yes. Like completely blew my mind to learn of all this history that I didn't know. But more importantly, it wasn't just the history, but the solidarity between groups that is never talked about, and therefore we think we've always been in conflict,
right?
When that's not true. Like we've come to make, like different groups of people have come together in such beautiful and respectful ways in the past that we could really learn a lot from.
Yeah. What do you hope people will keep in mind as they read your book?
That I'm not perfect.
I love that. Okay, here's my last question for you. If you could have one person, dead or alive, read this book, who would you want it to be?
My dad. Yeah. I really wish he could read it. I mean, I wish he could read. I just wish he could be here, you know?
Yeah, I know.
But I especially wish he could read this book because a lot of the conversations, you know, my dad, like, he didn't have like a whole big education. Like, it's not like he was reading books about history or whatever, but he was always like a very smart, very curious person. And so I had a lot of conversations with him that he would try to make jokes and make them funny. But I remember it's not in You Sound Like a White Girl. It's in my memoir. But I came to visit my parents in the U.S. one time, and my dad took me to the Capitol in Austin. And, I was like, me voy a dejar de llamar Julissa Natseli Arce Avilés. Like, I'm going to stop calling, I'm going to stop being me if one day I don't take back Texas for Mexico. Like, I was like 9 years old.
Oh my God. Revolutionary. I love it.
And my dad was just like, like he was just like so encouraging. He was like, yeah, like one day you will do that. And I think he'd be really proud of this book.
I love that. All right, everyone, you're listening. The book has been out for a total of 24 hours. As you're listening, go get this book. You Sound Like a White Girl. You can get it anywhere you get your books. There are links to everything we talked about today in the show notes, including a link to get this book from bookshop.org to support local bookstores. And of course, Julissa. Julissa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. This was such a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And everyone else, we will see you in the stacks. All right, everybody, that does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Julissa for being my guest. I'd also like to thank Emilia Posanza for helping to make this interview possible. Remember, the Stacks Book Club pick for March is A Mercy by Toni Morrison. We will be discussing the book on Wednesday, March 30th with Imani Perry. If you love this show and want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack. Make sure you're subscribed to The Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave us a rating and a review. For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram and at The Stacks Pod _ on Twitter. And check out our website, thestackspodcast.com. Our editor is Christian Duenas. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite. And our theme music is from Tigirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.